Good morning. I owe it to Janet Smith, who is here, and with whom I had breakfast this morning, to know that today is the 6th anniversary of the proclamation of Christ as King of Poland. So I wanted to congratulate you and the Polish people. And Janet, you see how honest I am. Only God, who is the creator of all things, can, by the power of his word, generate being out of nothingness. God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. God said, "Let us make man in our image," and in his own image, male and female, he created them. In its transcendence, the creative word of God is absolutely authoritative. Our being, our ontological identity, our universal filial vocation are God-given. As a creature, man cannot come to being, nor can he make anything come to being by the sole power of his own word. There is an ontological limit to the human being's use of language. Man can only name what is created, what God created, and what he himself created. The act of naming connects language and reality. Naming reality as it is, in its substantial and identifiable content, is a primordial and universal function of language. This function makes possible both clear social communication and interpersonal communion. While human language may not make being emerge from nothingness, it is nonetheless eminently creative and dynamic. Philosophers such as John Austin and Jean Ladrière have highlighted the performative character of language. Language is not merely descriptive. It has the power to act, to effect change, to generate newness. By saying "I do" at my marriage ceremony, I change status from unmarried to married. A man declaring his love to a woman generates a dynamic process that can lead to marriage. Parents talking to their children to educate them awaken their moral conscience and form their intelligence. This word-act nexus is deeply rooted in divine revelation. The biblical Hebrew davar signifies a conclusive word, a word which concretely achieves what it says. It is word in action, an efficacious word. Since the late 19th century, however, structuralist linguists such as Ferdinand de Saussure, the inventor of semiotics, who related meaning exclusively to the contrast between the signs and words constituting language, and the influential Roman Jacobson, largely contributed to disconnect language from the concrete reality it is supposed to signify. The purpose of these great linguists, who ignored God as irrelevant to their studies, was an auto-referential study of language, of the relationship between abstract signs and ideas without any reference to concrete reality and meaning. This trend has been both foundational and dominant in modern linguistics. Since the end of World War II, there have been nihilistic efforts to break the bonds between language and reason, between language and being. In the late 1940s, for example, the coiner of the deep ecology concept, Arne Næss, developed a theory about semantic fluidity and vagueness. He affirmed the potential for any given utterance to be variously interpreted depending on context and circumstance. In the late 1960s, Jacques Derrida elaborated his deconstruction discourse and claimed concepts had to be understood only in the context of their opposites. Breaking from Aristotle's metaphysical perspective, Derrida disconnected concepts, words, and their substance. Richard Rorty dogmatically affirmed that truths were human constructs and that knowledge was a sole linguistic affair. Judith Butler asserted that discourse was all there was, that there was no reality, only representation. These developments transformed reality into a text to be interpreted, into a process of change deprived of fixed and substantial content. Traveling from one interpretive choice to the next has been the postmodern individual's way of life. Traveling expresses a decision to perpetually shun personal engagement. On this traveling route, discourse superseded being, hermeneutics, my subjective interpretative choice, transcended metaphysics. Linguistics' disconnect of words from reality played a dramatic role in the acceleration of the Western shift towards postmodernity. A distinctive feature of our times, strongly affirming itself since the 1960s, has been the subversive instrumentalization of language for outright negation purposes, to deny our very human nature, fatherhood and motherhood, our sexual differentiation as man and woman, our spousal vocation. Perhaps the most eloquent manifestation of such a rebellious use of language is to be found in how Judith Butler ideologically reinterpreted Austen's performative language so as to stir up gender trouble. But an individual saying, "Let me be queer," cannot come to being out of nothingness as queer. That individual inevitably pre-exists as man or woman, his or her own word and volition. What such an utterance performs is what David Alprin, an American gay activist, adequately called an identity without an essence. In the light of universal reason, such a Promethean utterance is purely and simply an act of negation of reality, being, reason, conscience, truth, personhood. It is a moral decision to say no to what is, to who we are, to the one who lovingly created us as we are. Butler's performative language apes the creative word of God. It is anti-theistic and anti-Christic. Prometheus defied the gods by stealing fire from them. He created man from clay and gifted him with fire in the form of knowledge. Today, we witness a diabolical attempt to steal the fire from heaven, this fire being the Word, to create a new humanity. Since the Garden of Eden until the end of times, the choice of every human being has been between consenting to our universal, created and filial status, or rebelling against it, between yes and no. The contemporary advocates of the no to who we are have put language at the service of their utopian project to construct a new humanity. a humanity liberated from Sartre, called the en soi, our given being, from what Margaret Sanger, the founder of the IPPF, called woman's slavery of reproduction, from what the LGBT call heteronormativity. In both its feminist and homosexual interpretations, the gender revolution has been seeking to free humanity from the categories of man and woman, father and mother, spouse, son and daughter, masculinity and femininity, the marriage and family institutions. All of these, gender advocates claim, would be social constructs or stereotypes contrary to civic equality and liberty, therefore to be deconstructed by all means. Such a liberation endeavor is a direct fruit of atheistic humanism and atheistic existentialism. It negates our status both as creatures and as sons and daughters of God. There is not much left after this demolition enterprise. Only abstract, virtual, secular, anthropologically and sexually undifferentiated citizens, emptied from who they are and coming out in the anthropological desert that they created, affirming their identity without an essence of their own ever-changeable choosing. The Promethean instrumentalization of language over the last half-century has manifested itself in several ways. One has been the reinterpretation of words naming universal human realities and values, the reinterpretation of love, liberty, equality, rights, choice, happiness, human dignity, conscience, compassion, tolerance. Within these words now coexist contradictory interpretations according to whether one adheres to what the recta ratio can recognize as true or whether one rejects it. The proponents of sexual liberation, sexual diversity, abortion, euthanasia, assisted suicide, and so on, have been using words found in the Bible, as well as in mankind's great cultural traditions. They thereby destabilize the bond existing between the universal core content of these words and the words themselves. The disconnect has generated a Babel syndrome now of global scope, the same words now being used to express incompatible worldviews. Another way the Promethean agents of the revolution have instrumentalized language to push forward their special interest has been by introducing and mainstreaming words and expressions that they themselves had coined with a view to eventually substituting the language expressing what they aimed at deconstructing and thereby imposing their agenda. Examples of such substitutions are free love instead of marital commitment, reproduction instead of child conception or procreation, couples and individuals instead of parents, partner instead of spouse or husband and wife, families or family under all its forms instead of the family, gender instead of sex or even instead of man and woman, marriage for all instead of marriage between one man and one woman, free choice instead of gratuitous love or moral conscience, gender equality instead of male-female complementarity, and so on. The result of these substitutions is twofold. On the one hand, the quiet marginalization or even the disappearance of words belonging to the common semantic legacy of humanity for centuries, if not millennia, naming universal human realities, whose meaning was clear and which has been used publicly until recently. On the other, the effective imposition of a new language created by proponents of a deconstructionist agenda. Many of the terms they have coined do not substitute traditional terms, but promote outright their subversive new humanity agenda. Examples are contraception, safe abortion, sexual diversity, gender identity, reproductive and sexual health and rights, not to mention the prolific LGBT jargon, coming out, gender dysphoria, same-sex couples, cross-sex, etc. A third feature of the Promethean use of language to promote the advent of the new humanity has been the typically postmodern refusal to provide clear definitions for the newly created terms. This refusal betrays the strategic objectives pursued by the linguistic word-reality disconnect that we mentioned previously. The declared goal is to allow for an open-ended multiplicity of interpretative choices and to celebrate the diversity of these choices. The hidden but real goal is to forge forward wearing a mask, taking advantage of semantic fog to hegemonically impose on the greatest number one single interpretation, that of the advocates of the new humanity. Language is then used for social engineering and deceiving purposes. Let 1,000 flowers bloom, said Mao Zedong, until one interpretation of the new paradigms, one value system, would win the day and be allowed. The Polish people are no foreigners to totalitarian regimes' manipulative use of language for domination purposes. The new subversive language appeared first not bottom-up in local and national cultures, not in the national debate of democratic countries, but in the discourse of a relatively small number of experts, ideologues, NGOs, lobbies, foundations, which had first an internationalist, then a globalist perspective, and built a solid collaboration with the United Nations during the Cold War. They then started quietly introducing their language in that of international cooperation. Over the course of the immediate post-Cold War wave of conferences between 1990 and 1996, UN member states formally consented to the UN's partnership with non-state actors, thereby birthing global governance. Now let me just give you a very brief historical overview of the penetration of the new language in international cooperation since the 1948 Universal Declaration. The document reflecting the spirit of member states at the beginning of the UN, the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights, does nothing more than declare what all men and women, endowed with reason and conscience, as the Declaration itself reckons in its Article 1, can universally recognize as true and good. Accordingly, the Declaration uses language naming reality as it is, conforming to universal human nature. Hence, it recognizes the family in the singular, not families, as the natural and fundamental group unit of society, entitled to protection by society and the state, based on marriage between one man and a woman, and entered into only with the free and full consent of the intending spouses, clearly understood in the context of these documents to mean a husband and a wife, a man and a woman. The Universal Declaration affirms the inherent meaning belonging to their given nature, the inherent dignity of all members of the human family. the inherent dignity of the human person, its sexual differentiation as man and woman, their equality in dignity, marriage as a union between a man and a woman, procreation and motherhood, the family as the natural and fundamental group unit of society, the rights of parents to choose the education that shall be given to their children, the spousal identity of the human being are universal, interrelated, inalienable, indissoluble realities. The Universal Declaration does not cast doubt on their interdependence, nor on the ontological unity of man and woman, of which the biological identity is but one component. The revolutionary process attacking the wonderful anthropological coherence declared in 1948 started with the contraception agenda, a word whose root, contra-conception, unambiguously betrays the revolution's negation of what is. In May '68, as the youth revolt was unfolding in France and the United States, the first UN Conference on Human Rights, held in Tehran, stipulated in its Article 16 that parents had a basic human right to determine freely and responsibly the number and spacing of their children. The article uses the word parents and uses neither the terms family planning nor contraception. But UN member states adopted this article under the combined pressure of the IPPF, Planned Parenthood International, and John Rockefeller and his Population Council, who clearly intended the article to translate into the right of parents to use contraception. The Club of Rome's seminal 1972 Limits to Growth report had a massive influence on UN policies and the advent of global governance. The language in this report is more explicit. It uses terms such as contraception, birth control, wanted children, unwanted children, family planning, reproduction, and introducing the term abortion, even before Roe versus Wade. The UN's first conference on the environment, held in Stockholm in '72, introduced the term family planning in UN language. At the first UN Population Conference held in Bucharest in 1974, a shift occurred from parents to couples and individuals. From then on, all UN documents would apply the right to family planning, never again to parents, but to couples and individuals, as did the 1994 Cairo Conference on Population. The first UN Conference on Women, held in Mexico in '75, used terms such as stereotyping, empowerment, partner, freedom of choice. The second UN Conference on Population in Mexico in 1984 introduced the novel expression unmet needs of contraception and sexuality education and safe abortion. At the third Women's Conference in Nairobi in '85, the word gender appeared for the first time. The second Environmental Conference in '92 at Rio de Janeiro introduced the expression reproductive health, and the fourth UN Conference on Population in Cairo, reproductive rights, sexual health, sexual rights, family in its various forms. The new anthropological language contained in the UN Conference's platforms for action expresses an agenda attacking life, motherhood, parenthood, our innate sexual differentiation as man and woman, marriage and the family. Authored by a few individuals and organizations, the Club of Rome, the IPPF, the Rockefellers, gender feminists, it historically became the object of a so-called global consensus during the post-Cold War UN conferences. Global governance has, in practice, treated this alleged consensus as normative. The new language has by now globally spread at all levels. While it coexists at various degrees with the traditional language of the world's diverse cultures, the global elite at the rudder of global governance has made phenomenal inroads in the past 30 years in spreading its agenda down to the local level. Let us now conclude with some pastoral reflections. First, let me suggest that it belongs to the Church evangelizing mission to use a language clearly naming our God-given anthropological nature and vocation. The Bible expresses its revealed anthropology in a language that is simple, universal, and irreplaceable. In many parts of the Church, however, global governance's anthropological language achieved significant inroads. In fact, the very use of the term partnership in Gaudium et Spes number 48 that this conference refers to, the intimate partnership of married life and love, reveals its penetration in magisterial documents even already in the 1960s. The word spouse is irreplaceable. The word partner is ambivalent. Let us then pay attention to the words we use and make sure that they convey the good news of God's design for man and woman in its fullness. A second thought regards the depth of the anthropological destruction we are now confronted with. The current postmodern culture, denying reason the capacity to reach reality, denying even the very existence of human nature, has engaged humanity in a dead end. At this point, does it not become clear that divine revelation comes to the rescue of reason and rationality? My last remark is an intuition. It concerns the disconnect between language and reality that I spoke about at the beginning to liberate us from the being that we received. Many rightfully see a return to metaphysics as the cure to the postmodern crisis. But for this return to metaphysics to fully respond to the challenges of our times, shouldn't Christians propose an ontology of love, of interpersonal communion, finding its source in God's Trinitarian love, complementing the ontology of being? Divine revelation teaches us that God, that I am who I am, is love. The Word, the Davar, the Logos, through him all things came to be, and without whom came to be not one thing, revealed himself to be the Son of God, the second person of the Holy Trinity. The Word, the Logos, is the Son. It is not by chance that in our day, the attacks against family, marriage, love, and interpersonal communion have taken place through the word, through language. I would venture to say, at the end of my talk, that the ontology of love and the ontology of being are one and universal. In order to overcome the abstraction and virtuality enslaving humanity in this postmodern age, to make communication possible again amidst a humanity dwelling on a global Babel tower, to announce the good news of interpersonal communion as our eternal vocation, let us strive not only to restore language's intrinsic connection to concrete reality, but to filially manifest the fatherly love by which this reality was created, redeemed from sin, and is currently sustained. Thank you.